was asked to come in and to help the F4 crews, help them learn how to perform well in close-in air combat. Now we are standing in front of the F4 Phantom II. This was also an early supersonic fighter designed for the Navy as well as the Air Force. But here we're going to be talking about the Navy version of it. And this airplane came out shortly after the F-8 Crusader entered service. I want to show you something about this airplane which helps explain how the F-8 community came together with the F-4 community and how they helped each other out when times were rather difficult. This, you can see, this is a more of a, you can say, a modern version of the fighter, and the fighter was being designed for, in this particular case, as well as other cases, to include a pilot up front and a weapon system operator in the back. You notice it has a large nose cone. This housed the airborne radar system. It was really quite advanced. It was long range. In other words, it could detect enemy airplanes at exceptionally long range. Roughly, we're talking about 200 miles, give or take. It also had an infrared sensor, which you can see down here. Now, the theory was that the radar up here could be connected electronically to the missiles that it was carrying, right? So the radar and the missiles worked together. These are an early version missile, but it carried a number of missiles, the Sidewinder, of course, and the Sparrow missile. It carried missiles as its major weapon system. The crew member in the back, we call him a weapon systems operator or a naval flight officer in the back, was basically responsible for connecting the radar and the missiles and doing all of that weapon system work, which is very, very complicated, particularly during this time. This is the analog era. The digital electronics weren't invented at this point in time. The airplane was designed to go supersonically. It had some rather important supersonic characteristics, given that it was much larger than the F-8 Crusader and was heavier than the F-8 Crusader. It had two engines, therefore, to help it achieve supersonic flight, and it was quite effective in terms of its supersonic capabilities as well as in terms of its air combat capabilities. The wing area was fairly large. It's about 500 square feet, so it made it a rather large airplane with a large wing area. It could carry a significant amount of weapon systems and fuel, extra fuel in the external storage. You can see over here, that's a fuel tank. These are missile systems. Now, this is important. At this time, there was a raging debate going on within the fighter community. Do we need guns or do we not need guns? Do we need to engage in close-in air combat preparation and training, or do we not need to do that because the long-range radar coupled with the missile systems were sufficient to defeat the enemy in air combat? That was the prevailing wisdom of the day, and so this airplane did not have close-in air combat weapons capabilities. It did not carry a gun, to be specific, and therefore the flight crews were actually not trained initially in close-in air combat. The thinking was that close-in air combat was no longer necessary because of the advances in radar and missile technology. That idea and that perspective turned out to be seriously wrong. And this is not necessarily a criticism of anyone. I think everybody was doing the best that they could, but there was really some serious errors made in our ability to think, particularly in our ability to think critically. We relied very, very heavily on what we thought was the latest technology without considering other things as well on an equal basis. Technology alone is not going to win the war. Technology is only a piece of it. The major component of any warfighting capability is the human. And this system was designed to at least partially take the human out of the loop and allow the machine to do its thing rather than the human getting deeply engaged in combat planning and execution. During the early stages of Vietnam, what we call Rolling Thunder, the air combat performance of the F4 crews was quite disappointing. And that is, again, not a criticism of anybody, but that was the fact, is that the performance was disappointing. The flight crews were actually not trained in close-in air combat prior to going to war because many thought that that was unnecessary and a waste of resources. That turned out to be seriously wrong. One of the upshots of all of this was the Top Gun school. Right? So this was one of the reasons why Top Gun came into being, was because we collectively, the fighter communities, made a serious error, which was eliminating close-in air combat training. The flight crews needed to understand how to engage the enemy in close-in air combat and win. The F4 had some capabilities of close-in air combat without the gun, but it was somewhat limited. Nevertheless, there were missile systems available, particularly the Sidewinder missile, which is my favorite, by the way. That missile was a good missile for relatively close-in air combat. My job, as it turns out, was the flight crews that were manning the brand new F4s. They were manning these airplanes and they were getting ready to deploy to the Vietnam waters and to the Vietnam area of battle. They were not trained for close-in air combat. And this, of course, caused a huge panic among most of the fighter community. The Top Gun school was formed up, and they started working to correct this deficiency. And this Top Gun school was started at Naval Air Station Miramar on the West Coast. There was a similar initiative at Naval Air Station Oceana on the East Coast. I was involved in the Top Gun initiative at Naval Air Station Oceana, Virginia. And I was asked, because I was an F8 pilot at the time, I was asked to come in and to help the F4 crews that were stationed there as well, help them learn how to perform well in close-in air combat. And that was my job for a considerable period of time. It was a volunteer position. They asked for volunteers. I was one of the few that volunteered to do this. It was a rather dangerous job. We actually did lose some pilots in this training effort, as well as the Top Gun school on the West Coast lost a number of pilots in this training initiative. And that's because this is a very, very highly dynamic environment, and it is really quite dangerous to perform in this environment well. Were we successful? Yes, we were. Right? Collectively, there's a lot of people that came forward and to help out. I will point out a few here. I don't mean to slight anybody, but my memory is somewhat limited now. Certainly Captain Dean Pedersen, who was the founder of Top Gun School at Naval Air Station Miramar, deserves a lot of credit. Other people as well. Captain Bill Kuiper, who was the first Westerner to fly the MiG-21. He deserves an enormous amount of credit for his efforts as a member of VX4, stationed at Point Mugu, California, Naval Air Station Point Mugu. And his report, which was called Ham Donut, was one of the things that I used in my work very, very extensively. Without his work, we were really kind of shooting in the dark. He clarified so many things for us in terms of air combat performance against our formidable enemy, which is the MiG-21 aircraft produced by our arch enemy during the Cold War. And that was the airplane to defeat. And my job was to help the F4 flight crews learn how to defeat that airplane, because my airplane, the F-8 Crusader, had very, very similar aerodynamic characteristics to the MiG-21. Both lightweight fighters, very small, hard to see, very, very fast, and difficult to defeat in close-in air combat. Now, this airplane, as it turns out, was really quite a remarkable achievement. I want to point out just a couple of things here to get you aware of what a great airplane this was, notwithstanding the fact that it didn't have some of the weapon systems that we wanted it to have, namely the guns. This airplane was capable of Mach 2. It was extremely fast. It had a rather remarkable wing design. You might ask me, why is this tilted upwards? Why is this section tilted upwards? Well, it has to do with stability. There were some stability issues with the lateral stability issues with the airplane, and so they tilted this upward to give it what is typically called dihedral to help in the stability. It had two engines, J79 engines, which are really quite remarkable engines. They produced about 12,000 pounds of thrust in basic engine. We call that military rated thrust, and also with afterburner, which we call combat rated thrust, those engines produced about 18,000 pounds of thrust. That's together, you can see two engines like that together. We're generating an enormous amount of thrust to enable this airplane to go supersonically, and it was really quite effective. The max speed of this airplane actually was clocked at Mach 2.23. So this was really quite a remarkable achievement. The F4 crews were exceptional pilots and weapon systems officers, and they did an amazing job for many years. I was honored to help them in the area of close and air combat. It was an honor for me to work with such fine people and to help them become the best that they possibly could be. And I think, I may be stretching it a bit, but I think I achieved that. I think I achieved that objective, which is to help them become the very best that they could possibly be in this very demanding environment, this life of a sonic warrior. We're talking about a very demanding environment. Many things that we were doing as sonic warriors had never been done before. We were plowing new ground. The F4 crews, for sure. The F8 crews, my community, absolutely. We were plowing new ground. And we, I think, if you look at it and what we were able to accomplish, I think we did our job. I think we stepped up to the plate, and I think we did our job. And I think we were there protecting this great country. And our ability to perform at that level, at the tip of the spear, was decisive in many areas and in many ways.